Rowan of Rin, The Journey by Emily Rodder.
Chapter 5. The Mountain. They had been walking beside the dry bed of the stream for hours and had left the village far behind. Looking back, Rowan could no longer even see the tall stone walls of the mill, the highest building, because the trees had screened it from view. In front of them, like a massive wall, rose the mountain. In another 2 hours, the others said, they would reach it. The map showed clearly that they must begin their climb at a place where the water gushed from its underground tunnel to form the stream. There they would rest for a while and consult the map before going on. Rowan was very tired. The bag he carried was dragging at his shoulders, and his back and legs ached. But he knew he had to keep walking and not complain. The others were trying to make it easy for him to keep up, but he could tell that the slow pace was irritating Brondon and Vale at least. It was hard to tell how Ellis felt, because he rarely spoke at any time. Even when they had passed the mill and the great wooden wheel lying motionless in the mill raced its own channel on one side of the dry stream bed, he had said nothing, only looked, then turned his head back towards the mountain. Rowan watched him now striding at the head of the group. He carried his pack and the extra weight of a heavy rope, a small axe and their supply of torches with ease. Close behind him walked his sister. They were a strange, silent pair. Rowan had heard Gilla say to Strong John that it was as though they lived in a world of their own, a world inhabited by only 2 people. They seemed as hard and immovable as the stone walls of their own mill. They were about the same age as Gilla, and Rowan had taken them for granted as he grew up. They were just part of the normal day-to-day life of the village for him, like the other adults he had known since babyhood. But lately he had come to realise that Val and Ellis really were unusual, and that his mother and people like Strong John and Alan thought so too. Behind Val, a head shorter but stockier and determined, tramped Brondon. Marley came next, smiling occasionally at Alan, who was swinging along beside her, whistling and singing as if he were on a country jaunt. They had put Rowan second last, with Strong John bringing up the rear. Every now and then John would speak to him. "All well, Rowan?" he would call heartily, or "Nearly there now, my friend." Rowan would nod and mutter an unwilling answer. He knew John didn't really care how he felt. He just felt responsible for him. John was good-natured and agreeable to everyone. It was his way, and he had always been pleasant to Rowan, but that was different from liking. He cared for Anand. You could see that. But with Rowan, he never really relaxed. He tried too hard to be nice. You don't have to try when you really like someone. Rowan knew that, and sometimes John called him Skinny Rabbit and laughed at him for being afraid of things. John was talking to him now because of Gilla. Rowan had heard his mother whisper, "Take care of him," as she said goodbye to the big man before they left. And John had taken both her hands in his and said, "I will, Gilla. By my life, I promise I will bring him home safe. I will bring him home to you." Remembering this, Rowan felt a flash of resentment. What right had Strong John to look at his mother like that? What right had he to hold her hands as if they were more to her than her dead husband's friend? It had been a shock to him there in the market square, when he realised that John might feel more for his mother than simple friendship. It had been horrible to think that he might even plan on becoming her husband one day. No one could ever take his father's place, thought Rowan bitterly. No one. He stamped along, staring straight ahead. And John should feel responsible for this mess, he thought. It was John's teasing that had angered Sheba, so that she made had made Rowan the keeper of the map. It was John's fault that Rowan had been forced to become a weak, unwanted seventh member of this party. At that, Rowan's thought changed direction, and his anger cooled. He wondered whether John and Marley had remembered Sheba's words. 7 hearts the journey make. 7 ways the hearts will break. They said nothing, but surely they must have thought about it, as he had. A shiver ran down his spine. There was no way that Sheba could have known the number of travellers in advance, unless she really had had a vision of the future as she lay back in her chair, her eyes half closed. And if that part of the prophecy had come true, what of all the rest? Rowan bent his head to watch the ground under his feet. He did not want to look at the mountain. As the last hour's tramping drew to a close and the rocks of the mountain's foothills loomed large and sharp, the sun was already warm on Rowan's back. For some time now he had managed to stay on his feet only by thinking of the buckshot. While Jill had been loading his pack for the journey, he had slipped away to the fields to say goodbye. He had found the beast swaying anxiously in the green grass that surrounded the muddy drinking pool. "We are going to help you," Rowan had told them as he moved from one to the other, stroking and patting, drawing in the familiar warm animal smell of them. "Soon there will be sweet water again. It won't be long." Last of all he had come to Star. He put his arms as far as they could reach about her neck and laid his head on her shaggy wool. "Goodbye, Star," he had said. "Wait for me. I will bring back the water. I will not fail you." He knew Star could not understand his words, but she had grunted and snuffled to him as if comforted just by the tone of his voice. "And Nan and Mother will see to you while I am gone," he had told her. "If Dawn has her calf while I'm away, they will help her. They promised me." One final hug, and he had to go, but Star's trust and strength stayed with him, even when his knees trembled with tiredness and his breath shuddered in his chest. "Yo, Ellis!" Strong John's shout broke into Rowan's daydream. Alan and Marley came to a stop in front of him. He stumbled to a halt and looked up. Before him rose a cliff of rock. Beside him the dry stream bed had become a deep round hole, still puddled with a little muddy water. There was a black opening in the cliff just above the hole. Dying weed and moss crusted its smooth edges, so this was where the water came from. "The water usually gushes from here," Strong John was saying to Val and Ellis, pointing to the opening. "When it is running as it should, you cannot stand here without being soaked by spray." Brondon clambered down into the empty pool and walked busily around in it, kicking at the soft mud. Then she bent over the rock to look up into the opening in the cliff face, as though hoping to find an answer there. "Sheba said the problem was at the top of the mountains," said Marley, who did not seem to be able to stop herself from being irritated by Brondon. "There is nothing to see down here." "There is no harm, I suppose, in looking for myself, Marley the Weaver," Brondon retorted. She rubbed her hand against the rock, feeling up into the hole in the cliff as far as her arm would reach. "A round tunnel. The bottom, walls, and top are polished smooth," she reported, and wiped her slimy hands against her clothes before climbing back onto the bank. "All the sharp edges have been worn away by the running water, no doubt." "As one would expect," snapped Marley. Rowan sank down on the grass. His knees would not hold him any longer. He pulled off his heavy bag and fumbled in it for his drink bottle. "Drink a little, but not too much," Alan warned, kneeling down beside him. "We do not know how long our supplies may have to last. We may not find water on the mountain." Rowan swallowed a mouthful of warm, metal-tasting water. It was delicious. He could have drained the flask easily, but he forced himself to replace the cap, and as he did so, tears sprang into his eyes. He was so tired, and the real journey had not even begun. The other members of the party threw down their bags and stretched. Then one by one they too flung themselves down on the grass. "The map, Rowan," urged Alan. "Let us see it now, but hold on to it all the time, mind you. The coming and going of the figures upsets my stomach." Rowan took the map from his pack and unrolled it on the grass, weighting the corners down with stones. The others gathered round. "We are here, you see," said Strong John, his fingers hovering over the surface, "and according to the red markings, we must start climbing at just this point. The track goes up past the cave from which the stream flows and continues until the mountain levels and the trees begin. Up there," he pointed to a green waving mass of leaves high above them. "A steep climb," grunted Val. "The boy will have trouble." "Then we will have to help him," said Strong John cheerfully. Alan was puzzling over the map. "What are these white patches?" he asked, waving a finger over several places on the parchment. Marley frowned. "They are all beside the path, 6 of them in all. Could it be that Sheba had erased some things of importance to trick us?" "I would put nothing past her," said Strong John. "But after all, it is the path that is most important, and that at least is clear." "Quite right," put in Brondon, stretching and yawning. "It is pointless to be concerned with anything other than the task at hand." But Rowan stared at the white patches on the map with a growing sense of anxiety. Why had he not noticed them before? Now that he had seen them, they jumped out at him. Blank spaces almost evenly spaced along the path, the last at the very top. Blank spaces on a surface otherwise completely covered with colour and line. What did they mean? The first space was at the point where the path entered the trees. They would find out what it meant soon enough. "We go through the forest at first, it seems," Brondon was continuing. "A flat walk due west. That should be easy enough, though of course with the boy it will take us longer." She sighed heavily and returned to the map. "The directions are clear. Where the forest trees ends, we turn northwest and move across this lower ground. A short distance. It should not take long to cover. And so on, up to the top. Simple. I have a compass, fortunately, and so I know do Marley and John, for we traded for them together on our last trip to the coast." She turned to Val and Ellis. "You really should take your turn on the market trips, my friends. So many interesting things to see, and useful things to trade for." Val shrugged. "The mill must keep working, Brondon. We cannot close it down to gallivant whenever we please." "But one of you could go, and one could stay," suggested Alan, lazily chewing a blade of grass and blinking up at the sky. Val went very still. "That would not suit us," said Ellis flatly. "It is not our way." "You never go to the coast either, Alan," Marley pointed out. "You always say you are too busy. You're as bad as Val and Ellis." Brondon opened her mouth to say something, then thought better of it. "In any case," she remarked instead after a moment, "the compasses are a marvel. The Maris folk use them when sailing the open sea. How much easier than that will our task be, for we have landmarks to follow also. We will be home by tomorrow midday. Mark my words." "If it were so simple, we would not have needed to bring the map with us, Brondon." Marley leaned forward. "The mountain is a dangerous place, a place to fear. You should take nothing for granted." "I take nothing for granted, Marley the Weaver, as you know, except the evidence of my own eyes," snapped Brondon. "And if you fear, you should not be of this party. It is bad enough that we must drag the boy along, quivering in his boots. Do not forget, Brondon, that you were the one who insisted upon that," barked Strong John. Brondon shrugged and turned away. "It would be better," said Alan mildly, "if we put aside our differences." Then he sat up and widened his eyes. He hurled out his hands, making them tremble violently. "And if fear is the issue, I, for one, am terrified," he squeaked. He threw himself back onto the grass, wagging his head and chattering his teeth. Strong John and Marley laughed, and even Rowan managed to smile, but Val and Ellis stared silently first at Alan and then at each other. Brondon snorted. "Well, if Alan can be revived from his terror, I think we should begin," Marley said, pulling a thick rope from her pack. "We will climb with ropes, will we not? I may not feel the fear of which I am accused, but I do not fancy a fall on those rocks all the same." When food was scarce in Rin, Rowan had to climb trees, bending the leafy branches down to meet the snaffling, eager mouths of the hungry Bucksha. But he clung dizzily and pale to even the lowest boughs. He had no head for heights. The climb that followed was to him like the worst of nightmares. A rope attached him to Marley, Alan and the other climbers above, and to Strong John below. When he slipped, as he did over and over again, his light body, weighed down by his pack, swung sickeningly into space as far as the rope allowed. The sky spun above him, the ground spun below. His own terrified screams echoed in his ears. His ribs were crushed by the rope that saved him, and then his body swung back against the rocks with a bruising thud, and he had to climb again. This was bad enough, but worse was the fear that one of the others would prove as careless as he. If John slipped, the weight might pull them all to their deaths on the rocks far below. If one of the others slipped, even John might not be able to hold them. Sore, trembling, and aching in every muscle, Rowan struggled on, and when at last they dragged him over the top of the cliff, he fell to the ground, sweating and panting. The world swam red before his eyes, and for a moment before he fainted. Chapter 6. The Forest. Star was licking Rowan's cheek and forehead with her rough, cool tongue. Rowan smiled. "Stop it, Star. Leave me be," he mumbled. He rolled his head from side to side on the grass. "He is babbling," someone said in disgust. The picture of Star slowly dissolved. Rowan opened his eyes and found himself staring into the serious face of Strong John. For a moment he hesitated. Then, with a wave of bitter disappointment, he realized where he was. Not at home in the Bucksha fields with Star, who loved him, but on the mountain with Strong John, who disliked him, Marley and Alan, who pitied him, and Brondon, Vale and Ellis, who despised him. "He is babbling," Vale repeated impatiently. "By my life, how are we burdened by this weakling? Look at the sun. It must be nearly 11. John threw aside the damp cloth with which he had been bathing Rowan's face. "He is awake now," he said bluntly, "and weakling or not, he fought that cliff gallantly. Val the miller, he fought it to exhaustion." He stood up and walked away, arching his cramped back. Rowan lay still, looking up at the sky. His body felt heavy, but his head felt very light. There was a soft ringing in his ears. Val was right. The sun was high. He must have been lying here for a long time, sleeping, dreaming of home like a small child. His face began to burn, and he struggled to sit up. Easy, boy." "Rowan," grinned Alan, kneeling down beside him and supporting his back. "We must crawl before we can walk. Have this." He held a flask to Rowan's lips, and Rowan swallowed gratefully. "When you are feeling better," Alan went on, glancing meaningfully at the others, "we will move on into the forest. Here." He dragged Rowan's pack towards him. "You can spend your time usefully by holding the map for us while we look at it once again." "We have seen the way we must go," frowned Brondon. "We do not need the map. Ah, youth, youth, you must not forget that I am 3 years older than you, Brondon, smiled Alan, and my poor memory is failing fast. Rowan knew that Alan was only giving him something to do while he rested, but he slid the map from his bag and unrolled it slowly. It would not hurt to study it again. His eyes travelled along the red dotted line, past the sketched-in stream bed, the hole in which the water usually fell, the opening in the cliff itself, the entrance to the forest beside a high pointed rock not far from where they sat now, the path through. Rowan blinked, and looked, and blinked again. He tried to speak, and almost choked. Alan looked at him quickly, and then glanced at the parchment. He exclaimed under his breath. Then, "John!" he shouted. John spun around and ran back towards them, while the other members of the party craned their necks to look. Rowan was pointing wordlessly at the map. At the place beside the beginning of the forest path, where once there had been a clear white space, there were 6 lines of black writing. In a low voice, Alan read the words aloud. "Let arms be still, and voices low. A million eyes watch as you go. The silken door your pathway ends, where fire and light will be your friends. Then see yourself as others may, and catch noon's eye to clear your way." "What nonsense is this?" demanded Val. "Who has been playing the fool?" "No one has touched the map, Val," retorted Marley. "The words have appeared since we last looked at it." "That is impossible," said Brondon. She bent over the map, squinting at the words as though to find a clue as to how they had come there. "It matters not a jot where it came from," cried Alan. "The question is, what does it mean?" Strong John cleared his throat. "Whatever we are dealing with here," he said, "it is certain that the words have not come to us by chance. They give us instructions and a warning." "The words suggest we do not fling our arms about or speak loudly," Alan remarked. "That is clear enough. I shall follow that advice to the letter." "That may prove difficult for you, Alan," said Murray dryly. "The words also mention noon." Strong John was unsmiling. "I suggest we begin our forest journey as soon as we can. It will be noon in about an hour by my reckoning." He held out a hand to Rowan and held him to his feet. "Roll up the mat and stick it through your belt for now, boy," he said roughly. "My load is unbalanced, I find, and I need to carry your pack as well as my own to even the weight, if you do not object." He did not wait for an answer, but swung both bags onto his shoulders and began striding towards the pointed rock. The others hurried after him. Rowan, no longer weighed down by the pack on his back, found he was able to keep up quite easily despite his bruises. They paused at the pointed rock and peered between the first trees. Sunlight filtered through the rustling leaves and lay in pools on the forest floor. There was a rough winding path in front of them, soon lost to view behind the undergrowth. "This looks pleasant enough," said Alan. "Shall I lead this time?" "The gravity of the task may help me hold my tongue, as the verse commands. Stranger things have happened." "Then lead by all means," grumbled Brondon. "Any peace from your infernal chatter will be a blessing." They moved into the forest. Rowan noticed that all of them, whatever their feelings about the map's instructions, kept their arms close to their sides, and no one spoke. In a few minutes the path had twisted and turned so that they could no longer see the cliff top from which they had come. As they trudged deeper into the forest, the trees around them became bigger and closer together, tangled with vines and surrounded by straggling bushes. The light became dim, and the silence. Rowan, keeping close behind Marley and listening for Strong John's firm step behind him, thought that he had never experienced so silent a place. Where were the birds? and the crickets and lizards and other small creatures that usually inhabited woods like this. Then he heard it. A faint twittering sound was floating down the path from somewhere ahead of them. A large colony of small birds by the sound of it. Rowan was familiar with all the birds of Rin, but this sound was like nothing he had ever heard before. These little creatures must belong to a breed that did not stray into the valley. They would not be nesting at this time of year, but still he looked forward to seeing them fluttering and hopping around. His spirits lifted at the thought of it. The twittering grew louder and louder. Alan began to walk faster, as if he too was interested in what was ahead. Soon he had left Marley behind. She clicked her tongue and hurried to join him. Rowan stretched his legs to keep up, tried to peer around Marley's shoulder as the path turned once more, and so he stumbled and nearly fell as she gasped and cannoned into Alan, standing still and almost invisible in the dimness. The creeping sound was deafening now. Strong John grabbed Rowan's arm and steadied him, frowning as Val, Ellis and Brondon bumped into him in their turn, and still Alan did not move. "Alan, you blockhead, what game are you playing?" Brondon barked. The twittering stopped abruptly, and the rustling, creeping, whispering sound took its place. Alan looked back at them, his face creamy pale in the dim light, but he did not answer, only moved his head very carefully from side to side. And then they saw what he had seen. On both sides of the narrow path, spiders, thousands of them, huge, black, velvety spiders as big as Strong John's hand, crawling over vast webs of white silk that draped the trees so thickly that the bark and leaves were hidden. Their eyes were shining, 1,000,000 eyes. Rowan's skin began to creep. They were going to have to walk between these crawling webs, the gigantic spiders listening for them, reaching out for them. "Ugh!" Rowan heard a strangled gasp from somewhere behind him. The spiders froze and then began moving again in the direction of the sound. Strong John reached over Rowan's shoulder and pushed gently at Marley as a signal to move on. She pushed Alan in her turn, and he began easing forward, making as little movement as possible. But they had only gone a few steps before again there was a shuddering groan behind them, and Val was pulling at Strong John's sleeve. "Alice," she breathed, "he cannot." John, Rowan, Marley and Alan turned incredulously. Beyond Val's worried face, they could see the massive form of Ellis, his clenched fists crossed over his chest. His face was gleaming with sweat. He was panting and trembling, and every now and then a low moan slipped from his lips. "Spiders," breathed his sisters. "He cannot abide them. From a child he could not. At home not a speck of dust or a dry leaf may lie in a dark corner in case a spider seeks its shelter. The smallest of them is terror to him, and these are beyond anything." "Alice," whispered Strong John urgently, "come, man. It is not far. They are not on the path. If we take it—" "No," the sound bubbled from the big man's lips. Abruptly, he turned and pushed past Brondon, nearly toppled her off the path and into a web. He tottered back the way they had come. Then he rounded the bend and they could see him no more, but they heard the sound of his feet running out of the forest. "Go on," whispered Val, her voice fierce with worry and shame. "Go on. He will not return." Silently they obeyed. After a few minutes the twittering sound rose up again. The spiders were communicating once more, slowly rubbing their great ribbed back legs together like poisonous crickets. The noise was strange and horrible to hear now that they knew where it came from. Rowan crept along Marley, breathing in shallow gasps, making himself as thin and small as possible, trying not to look from side to side, trying not to think of the sticky white curtains that swathe the trees, the huge crawling spiders and their millions of eyes so close. To allow himself to speak or cry out would be to attract the spiders again. To touch one of the strands of thick white silk would be to call them running to him. He had seen enough insects caught in webs to know that he must go on walking and force down the fear. He must think. Remember the last line of the verse. The silken door your pathway ends. There fire and light will be your friends. Then see yourself as others may, catch noon's eyes to clear your way. The silken door, noon's eyes. It must be nearly noon now. He jumped nervously as Strong John's hand touched his shoulder. He looked up. They were in a small clearing. Before them was the silken door. It was a huge, gleaming white web, so thick that you could not see through it. Its surface was scattered with twigs and leaves caught in its sticky threads. It stretched from one side of the path to the other, blocking it completely, and all around it crouched hundreds of spiders, waiting. Alan turned carefully to face his companions. "What now?" he mouthed. "The verse," breathed Marley. "The verse has no meaning," hissed Brondon. "Cut through the web and be done with it, Alan. Or if you do not have the stomach for it, let me through and I'll do it myself." The spiders rustled and moved in the web. "No," whispered Strong John, "not while the spiders hang about the silk in such numbers. As soon as we touch the web, they will be upon us. We cannot risk that." "They may be quite harmless," said Val. "Or they may not," answered Marley. "As John says, we cannot risk it. We have already lost one member of our party." "What then?" Brondon was angry. Ellis's flight from the forest had been a great shock to her. How could such a big, strong man have such a childish weakness? She was baffled by it. She took care not to look at Val. How ashamed she must feel. The light changed. From directly above them a ray of sun penetrated the gloom of the forest, bathing them in warmth. The spiders around them began to chitter and creep back. "They do not like the light," Rowan breathed. "The verse said it. Fire and light will be our friends," it said. "Fire," whispered Brondon. "Throw a torch at the web." "Ellis was carrying the torches," said Val dully. Alan felt in his pocket and pulled out his tinderbox. "Who has something that will burn easily, even for a brief time?" "Do not make any sudden movements," warned Strong John, his eyes on the spider. Marley slipped her hand into her jacket pocket. She pulled out her compass, a comb, a mirror, and a handkerchief. She held the handkerchief out to Alan. He knotted it loosely and struck flame from the tinderbox. "Ready?" he warned. Then he lit the cloth and threw it straight at the centre of the white barrier. The silk sizzled and shrank as the handkerchief blazed. The spiders shrieked and scattered, but only for a minute. Within seconds, before even one of the party had taken more than a step forward, the flame had died down and the spiders were back. The hole gaped in the web now, but amid the smoke still rising from its blackened edges, hundreds of spiders were crawling, and more were on their way. "They are spinning," gasped Emma. "Already? They are mending the hole? We must drive them back." Strong John looked around desperately. "There must be a way." "They do not like the light," Rowan said again. "They do not like the sun." "We have no materials to make a torch here, Rowan," Marley answered. "We have nothing that will make the light that will burn long enough to hold the creatures at bay." But Strong John had grasped Rowan's shoulders. "Rowan, the verse, say the last lines again." Rowan repeated in a low voice, "Then see yourselves as others may, and catch noon's eye to clear your way." A thought struck him, and he looked quickly at Marley. "Noon's eye, the sun." Alan squinted upwards at the glare. "But the sun is falling here, where we stand. The web is in shadow." "What is it, Rowan?" said Marley, staring at him. "Why are you looking at me?" "The mirror," whispered Rowan. "Your mirror. In the mirror you can see yourself as others may. And the sun." "Yes!" Strong John clenched his fist. "But quickly, before the light goes. We have been here too long." Marley handed over the mirror. John held it in front of him, twisting it until it threw bright reflected sunlight onto the web. The spiders scurried away from their work around the hole, shrinking back into the shadows. "Give it to me," cried Val. She snatched the mirror from John's hand. She jiggled the glass, caught the sun, and dazzling light danced around and around on the silken door, pushing Brondon ahead of her. "Go!" she shrieked. "Go now!" Rowan ran with the others, his eyes fixed on the hole in the web and the glimpses of green beyond. Already the dancing light was fading. He reached the net and leaped through, while a million eyes glowed angrily in the shadows, cheated of their prey.